So welcome. My name is Jen Kreiger, and I am Chief Agile Architect at Red Hat in the Products and Technologies Division. I have a lot of people who ask me what that means. My answer is very simple. It is, I am a camp counselor, and I am also a cat herder. And so what my day-to-day job looks like is I give people career advice. I teach them how to have hard conversations with people that they might have maybe had a little bit of a collision with. And I also remind them that they're actually getting a paycheck, so they have work that they have to be doing, and probably this is the work that you need to be doing instead of the other thing that you're doing. So that's basically what my job looks like on a day-to-day basis. This talk is specifically about what we did internally to scale out one of our largest engineering programs at Red Hat. We specifically did use Scrum as a methodology, so if you wanted me to talk about Kanban or extreme programming or anything like that, I'm probably not going to talk too much about that stuff. I'm going to talk specifically about Scrum. And the internal teams that I'm going to be talking about are the Project Atomic and OpenShift teams specifically. So without further ado, I always like to start with what do I mean when I talk about scaling Agile. There is an industry perception right now that scaling Agile means you take a framework from some person selling you something and you kind of plop it on top of your teams, and then you have scaled Agile. What I have learned is that there is not a whole lot of use in doing that, mostly because engineers are very suspicious about process. So if you're going to ask them to do something that they're not necessarily wanting to do, they're going to ask you every little question about every little part of it. And 9 times out of 10, I can't even justify why I would be asking them to do something. So I tend to look at it from a more holistic perspective and say, don't change until you have to. So I'm going to walk through what it means to scale Agile from my point of view. For the sake of brevity, like I said earlier, Scrum. And so this is a standard Scrum team. You've typically got about 5 to 7 people, plus or minus 2. And you normally have a product owner, a Scrum Master, and the team. And these people generally will be working in 2-week sprints. They will hopefully be releasing something to a production environment every 2 weeks. And hopefully they also have customers that are waiting for that production release at the end of that 2 weeks. Now sometimes you can have some happy customers and some sad customers, but generally what you're looking for is on that 2-week cadence, some sort of feedback that's coming back into the team so they know how to course correct. And so that is my incredibly dumbed down version of what Scrum looks like to me. So the concept behind scaling Agile means at a very elementary level that you can take this model and you can multiply it by 2, by 3, or how many teams you need to actually get your work done. And so the really crux of this is it is actually practical, or does it actually work? And so I want to show you what this looks like when you actually scale out teams. So take, for example, you have 4 of these. And for whatever reason, 4 is the right number. And each of these teams are still doing the 2-week sprints. And at the end of those 2-week sprints, they're still doing production release. And they still have a bunch of happy customers at the end who are hopefully going to provide feedback to them. Now, here's where it becomes a little bit tricky. Because in this big miasma of all these people, it tends to be a little bit hard to kind of wrangle. So 5 to 7 people is easy to get everybody on the same page. Now you're looking at a bit of a scale that's probably not as easy. And so the first area of centralization that we generally seem to see is we take all of the product owners, all the people who are kind of responsible for those higher level product decisions and the direction of the team, and we want them to be on the same page. We want them to be saying the same things to teams. We want them to have general understanding of priority across teams. And in the case of where there might be some sort of conflicting decision, there needs to be some sort of central body to make a decision. And so we kind of add this whole layer on top where we're centralizing requirements, where we're kind of having a group thought about what it is the product is supposed to be doing. And that person who is making that high-level decision is what is known as a chief product owner. And so we generally have somebody up there who is going to take product owner 2 and 3 in the middle, who are having an argument over something that they want their teams to be doing. And that person's going to say, no, we're going to go in this direction. and we'll think about that other thing later. And the other area of centralization that we generally seem to see, and it's most common in IT back office shops, certainly most common in my experience over the last 20 years, I've seen this happen. The other area of centralization tends to happen in production, where teams are going to be releasing code into a central place. And so if we had all of these teams releasing all at the same time, a lot of older school IT shops don't necessarily have the automation or the capabilities to do that. And they also like to have some sort of production control between a developer or a development team and the actual people who support the servers. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. So what they do is they put a big wall between the teams and the actual release. And they generally have some release engineers there, but in typical true fashion, somebody pulls one of those engineers away to work on a production outage, and then you only have 2 left. And so you have kind of 2 bottlenecks going on here, one at the top and one at the bottom. So one of the questions I have for everybody in the room is, what does this look like? Anybody have any guesses? Yes, I heard it in the back. I don't know who said that. It's waterfall. And so I know that I am dumbing this down, and I'm going to get an angry call from the guy who came up with the Scaled Agile framework telling me all the reasons why I'm wrong. But this is what happens when you don't have experts in the room and you're trying to put a framework in place, because they don't understand what's supposed to be happening on either side. And there isn't somebody in the room who is going to train the people at the top or anybody who's spending the money to make sure that that second half is actually going to be going the way it should be going, which is basically automation. So this is what generally happens is you've got a lot of mini Agile teams in the middle doing their 2 iterations wrapped inside of a waterfall process. So now, Agile, the truth and the inspiration and the basis for it was supposed to have solved these problems. It was supposed to have done the correction for us here. It was supposed to have given us some sort of thought that everything from requirements to release was holistically covered under that methodology or under that umbrella of vision. And we know today that that's not true because we now have the introduction of the concept commonly known as DevOps, where it's focusing in on kind of the center of the process, which is really the interaction between the devs and the system admins in the process flow. And so if you look at this, you kind of look at this from the perspective of saying, what the heck happened? Why did Agile fail? And why is DevOps a thing now? And I might have given you some hints earlier, but does anybody have any thoughts on why DevOps came about? Anybody want to toss some ideas out there? It's okay to be wrong. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So failure is bad. Yeah. Anybody else? I thought I saw a hand over here. No? Okay. One of the most common things that I run into with teams is that they're not given time to actually automate their process. A lot of times we have a situation where a project manager decides to become a Scrum Master, and they decide that Agile is going to be their career path. And they really, really know the process of how to get the work done because they've been following Gantt charts for the last 20 years. But they have no understanding whatsoever about what it takes to get the technology out the door. So oftentimes when I am talking to my colleagues in the industry, they don't even know what continuous integration is. And they don't understand why they would want to make space for a team to actually allow them to focus on that. And I think that is ultimately why DevOps came around, because it was like the engineer saying, okay, thank you so much for all this process, but I really need to actually focus on my process too, which is I'm being asked to move faster and faster and faster and faster, but there is absolutely nothing there that's supporting that. And I know you just gave me 10 minutes to focus on it, I could actually fix those problems. And so, excuse me, ultimately, I think that is why DevOps came around. Because there's a movement where engineers wanted to do these things, and they were never really given an opportunity to. The other reason why is this. Agile and DevOps both are not going to work without us focusing in on this, which is my standard tin can telephone problem, which is this guy on the right is going to say, I would like a cheese sandwich. And the gal on the left is going to hear, I think I mud hike in bees manish. And it is the standard problem that I see in all teams. It doesn't matter what technology they're working on. It doesn't matter what process they're using, whether it be waterfall, disciplined agile, extreme programming. At the end of the day, we are human, and we generally don't work well together, especially when stress is really high and people are not necessarily doing the things that they want to be doing, or they don't even like their job. And so this is the crux of why Agile isn't working. Even though we started with the individuals and interactions over processes and tools, how many of you think processes and tools are easier than picking up the phone and talking to that really hard person that you got to talk to at work, right? Isn't it easy to just write them an email and say, you did this thing and I hate you because of it? Not that I've ever done that. So it's easier for you to send an email. It's easier for you not to have that direct conversation. And so this is the reason why Agile isn't working, why DevOps is probably not going to work unless we focus on these things. And so not to get y'all sad, because that's not what we do at Red Hat. We do focus on collaboration. And I'm here to show you how we actually did it. And hopefully this will help you all in your own practices at your companies so that you can take some of these things that we've learned back into your shops and maybe try it out. And so case study number one, these are our growing pains. So in about late 2014, we had two separate programs. We had the Project Atomic program, and we had the OpenShift program. And these were two separate teams trying to do what I like to call hybrid Scrum. The reason why I call it hybrid Scrum is because it's kind of a combination between Kanban and Scrum. Since we have upstream communities that definitely do kind of prevent us from doing everything that we want to do when we want to do it, we can't plan as well as maybe a Scrum team who has complete control of their code can. And so we take a little bit of a more relaxed approach for planning. We don't browbeat anybody if they didn't get their story points done for a sprint. So that's why I call it hybrid Scrum. On the Project Atomic side, we were doing 2-week sprints, and we had we had every 6 weeks we were doing a release of Red Hat Enterprise Linux Atomic Host to our customers. And in terms of the makeup of the team, there were 60 engineers, quality engineers, release engineers. We had an architect who, just in case anybody really wants to read behind the scenes there, that was our product owner. We just don't call them product owners. We had 2 Agile coaches and a product manager. On the OpenShift side of the fence, we had 40 engineers, 12 QE engineers, a release engineer, an architect, and 4 product managers. And so I'm going to show you what the detailed view of this looked like. So these were the 2 teams, 2 programs, and the products that they were supporting at the time. The first problem with this scenario was simply this. They're 2 separate programs, and there were technology dependencies between the 2 programs. So OpenShift was relying on Atomic to do the upstream container work. They were relying on Atomic to do the upstream Kubernetes work. And on the OpenShift side of the fence, we were doing 3-week sprints. And so the only time that these 2 programs actually matched up in terms of when you could pass work back and forth was about every 6 weeks. And that didn't really work too well. The other problem was, because we were sharing work across the 2 programs for Kubernetes, oftentimes what would happen was there's a couple people on the Project Atomic side that were doing work, and a couple of people on the OpenShift side doing work, and they weren't really on the same page. These guys wanted to do this, these guys wanted to do this, and no one was really having a conversation in an articulate way to kind of determine direction for the company. And then this was also the problem. We had 1 product manager on the Project Atomic side and 4 on the OpenShift side. And if you think that the engineers were not on the same page, well, so were the product managers. And so what was happening is the product managers over on the OpenShift side of the fence wanted this to happen, and the product manager over here was like, well, thank you for that information, but we're going to focus on this for a little while. And so they weren't in sync. And to add on to that, we had 2 teams that even though they were in the Project Atomic space, they're actually supporting the entire 2 programs. And so end-to-end integration and scale and performance, yeah, they were working on a RHEL Atomic host, but they were also working on OpenShift. And so they were getting prioritization from that 1 product manager over there and the 4 product managers over here, which was a little bit confusing for them. Does that sound familiar? How many of you are engineers? How many of you have multiple masters when in terms of priority, right? As an Agile coach, I don't like that. I want 1 master. I want 1 person telling that team what to do, or at least maybe not what to do, but where to go, right? I want that 1 point of contact. So what did we do? We merged the teams. We said we can't have a critical product line being managed by people who aren't working together. And so we put the 2 teams together. This was the first time at Red Hat that we had actually had a situation where we merged 1 VP of engineering's teams with another VP of engineering's teams that did not require us to change org structure. We just said, let's put them all together and see what happens. And so that's where the matrix part come in. No one on these teams reports up onto 1 manager. It was really the first time at Red Hat that we experiment with this. We generally like to have that 1 manager owns 1 team, owns 1 technology method of management. But this was the first time we experienced it because we couldn't, as a company, scale and continue to reorg people through our HR structure every single time a product changed. So our experiment worked. And so after we merged, we put all of the upstream teams into 1 group. We called it the building blocks team. So we had cluster infrastructure, which was really the Kubernetes team. We had the containers team. We had a networking team. Platform infrastructure was the team creating Atomic Host. And then we had storage and usability. The usability team is largely known for Cockpit. The second group was all origin. This was basically the upstream of OpenShift. This is OpenShift proper teams. It is made up of the developer experience team, integration services, platform management, and user interface. And then we also had a product team. We had the online team that is largely the team responsible for taking all of the R&D code and helping the OpenShift Online teams integrate it in. Productization, largely responsible for the actual delivery of the product through our production pipeline. End-to-end product integration, they are the ones who do all of the work with our all of the work with our providers. So they work with Amazon, Azure, and they make sure that OpenShift runs where it needs to run. Scale and performance, pretty straightforward. They make sure that we're not going to make it hard for people to use our product. And then internal tooling, we had a team that was specifically focused on improving the overall CI/CD experience for the entire program. And these teams were responsible at the high level for 4 products: the Atomic Host, OpenShift Enterprise, Online, and Dedicated. So looking at this, it seems like, oh, I forgot to mention, these guys in the middle are two product owners or architects, Dan McPherson and Mike McGrath at that time, were responsible for talking to all 100 engineers at any given moment about priorities, about technical direction, about what do you think if we try? Will you please review this design document for me? It was a pretty crazy role for those 2 guys, and so they were largely responsible for the technical direction at that time. So let's talk a little bit about some of the problems sorry, I should have been doing this at the time. Okay, so case study 2. So we eliminated that first bottleneck, and once we did that, we kind of opened up Pandora's box. We put everybody together, and then we started having other problems. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those problems right now. So here is the same team structure. And oh gosh, you guys can't read that. All right, let me see if I can read it to you then. That's what happens when you have projectors. And so the usability team, this is my little poke at them. they pretended to do Scrum. They weren't actually doing it. They were doing something completely different. The product three, or the product group three, they just never could get any time with the architects. The architects were so focused on Kubernetes and so focused on what was going on upstream that there really wasn't any support for the product side of the fence. The people are actually taking what we were doing and giving it to our customers. The productization, they just couldn't keep up. They were like, we're like 10 people. We have no time for all of the work coming through this. We need help. The building blocks team, they were 6 teams. Really what this refers to is they had all sorts of technology in there. So you're talking about Kubernetes, Docker, all of the networking that goes into OpenShift Online, OpenShift proper, platform infrastructure, atomic host, storage, could have been Ceph, Gloucester, whatever they were thinking at the time, and the cockpit team. So if you put them in a common architecture meeting, what makes you think the networking team is going to care anything about what the cockpit team is doing unless their things directly collide? They didn't. And so we're trying to shove them all into an architecture meeting and say, please talk about common architecture when there wasn't any common architecture. And so like 50 people would show up to a meeting and they'd be like, why are we here? And so that wasn't really good practice. So the storage team also was struggling because they wanted to know what other people were doing. They didn't really know about some of the other parts of Kubernetes, and they were struggling because they had no way of really talking to the rest of the Kubernetes teams. In this common architecture meeting, we would drive that agenda to exactly what it was that we needed to decide about, but it wasn't like an exploratory conversation where you come and you talk about what you're working on. That's not what it was about. So they had no path to finding out what other teams were doing. That directly impacted them. Platform infrastructure, they were a really great team. They picked up on Scrum almost immediately, and they were knocking the work out of the park. And they had cycles, but they didn't know how to help other teams. There was no way for them to kind of move work around or raise their hand and say, we got some time, do you guys need some help? And so that was a problem. Internal tooling, they finished their list of things they needed to work on, and they were just going to meetings and saying, well, we're done. We don't really have anything to tell you, but we're still here. Should we leave? Should we go and do something new? So they were kind of like in limbo. The networking team, why does our automation suck so hard? They were really frustrated because we had a lot of flakes in our test structure at that point, and they didn't know what to do about it, and there was no one who could help them because our architects were too busy talking about actual technology. And so that was really hard for them because they were new. A lot of the guys were new, and they didn't know how to fix some of that stuff. Let's see, platform management, their team just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then they were I think at some point, 15 people. And you can't do Scrum with 15 people in the room. It's just too much. And so they were like, we need to do something about this. The scale and performance team didn't have enough people on their team. And so they were struggling to keep up. And so you can see there's some serious resourcing concerns in here. It's not that we can move people around really easily, but we needed to because some teams didn't have enough work and some teams had too much. And then, of course, age-old problem, all of them had way too many bugs. Sound familiar? Yeah, because that's life. It's life of an engineer. And so what we did for this particular scenario, and by the way, they were also working on 6 minor releases and 4 major releases through this process. And so good for them for keeping up with everything that we were throwing at them. And so the team structure then changed again. This is circa 2016. And what we did was we kept the same core groups 0, 1, 2, and then we added a third group. And the most important part that we were doing at this time was that we kind of promoted some core people out of the teams into what we called a group lead role. This is, again, that product owner role. And so we immediately recognized that the architects could not continue to answer 100 people's questions every day. And so we had to scale that first. And so we did. We found 4 people, and we gave them the role of kind of keeping that core team together. We also did 2 major changes. We kind of pulled the Kubernetes upstream stuff out of that first group, and we put it in a central group so they could all talk together. And that solved the storage team's problem because they now had that group context where they were hearing what other Kubernetes teams were working on so they could learn more about the product line, learn more about the code, and they could get a general sense of, I guess, like team morale and team ownership. We also created a new group. We split some of the teams out into a product group, and we kept them kind of central and off to the side. And you might have noticed we also let the internal team go off and work on something new. So we said, sure, no problem. And in all this, we actually moved some people around. So you'll see we split the two container teams in half. They were also another team that had some serious overstaffing in there. And then the cluster infrastructure team and the platform management team also had some people move back and forth there. Okay. So case study number 3. And so we had some more. Sure.
Just a question about
Yeah.
that slide. Is it a coincidence that it looks a bit like a Kanban board?
No, it's probably just how my mind thinks.
Oh.
Yeah. But good. Yeah, no, it's just how my mind thinks, I guess. Yeah, it's not a Kanban board. However, I will say, good catch, because the way that's a really good point. The way we organized this program was very specific. And if you might notice, what we're doing is we're saying, in group 0, it's really all the basis, the infrastructure, the actual like building blocks. It's the first thing that needs to happen in the process. And then the second thing is Kubernetes. Again, it's upstream, but it's the second thing that needs to happen in the process. The Kubernetes work is dependent on what's going on in group 0. Group 2 is origin. Kubernetes is what origin is made up of. And so origin builds on Kubernetes. And then the product team is built on top of everything else. And so when we actually designed this, we also had not every single group was doing Scrum at the same time. So we didn't all start on Monday and end on Friday. We had a 2-day slip in between each group. And so the group 0 would end on a Tuesday. Group 1 would end on a Thursday. And so there was a 2-day window of time where information transfer could happen. People could see the demos and say, I think I need to do something with that, and let me bring it into what I'm doing over here. And so there's a little bit of a window of time between each demo. And we also didn't want to have demo overload where we stuck 100 engineers in a room and tried to do a demo, because that would take forever, quite frank. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
The production release is have different dates for each of the groups, right?
No, production release always happens at the same time at Red Hat. So we don't, it's not that we are releasing Atomic, well, we do release Atomic Host on its own production scale. It still goes out every 6 weeks. OpenShift goes out probably about every 6 months. So the releases that we're doing every 3 weeks is into either the upstream community or our own code repos. We don't actually release to production. And I don't think maybe our customers would, but I know for certain our customers would probably not want an operating system every 2 weeks. If you want one, raise your hand. Anybody want to reinstall everything on their? See, no one raised their hands. Okay, great. Good. Any other questions before I move on? I am going to talk about the why are we not doing a production release every 3 weeks in a second. Sure. That's actually a really good question. So the way that we do this is, yeah, sorry, thanks. We don't do a common demo, so how do we actually make sure that other teams are aware of what other teams are doing? Specifically, how are we getting information back and forth between the groups? Yeah. So we do a couple of things. The first thing that we do is we have what we call our little business unit and engineering sync once a week. It's kind of like what I like to call the put everybody in a cage and see who comes out alive. And I'm mostly joking. But in the early days, it really felt like that to me some days, where we all kind of, for an hour, the engineering management team and all the group leads and all of the folks on the product side get in a room, and we all talk about the things that are troubling us and that we're stuck on for an hour. And it works. And we talk about it back and forth, and the group leads share information back and forth, and the product managers share information back and forth. And then we talk about things like, Why is our production date going to slip? Or here's a customer report that we just got. Or here's an announcement that's going to impact our product line. And so that is the one of the syncing meetings that we do. Now those group leads take that information back into the groups, and they hold what we call a common architecture or cabal meeting on a weekly basis. And those meetings are attended by pretty much everybody inside the group. Depends if you're on vacation, we don't penalize you for that. Kind of nice about that kind of stuff. But generally what they do is they talk about the things that are going to impact that entire group. And then what they do is they just simply publish notes. And if you want to go, you can show up. If you don't have time, you don't have to. And then the third thing we do is we do these sessions we call deep dives. And even though our sprint reviews are very focused in on what the product line is, and the product managers go and they give thumbs up or thumbs down, we also have this educational process that has to happen internally where we need to teach our customer support folks what we're building. And they're not going to be able to attend all these meetings, and they're certainly not going to go to our sprint reviews because they don't really care until it's actually a product. And so we do deep dives, and what we ask our engineers to do is essentially like a summit presentation on the thing they just built. And we record them and we share them out internally, and everybody can watch them whenever they want to. And so if the platform infrastructure team is interested in what the developer experience team just made and it directly impacts them, they have 3 different places in which they can get information on those things that are being built. Sure.
Just to be sure, each group also represents a team, right?
Yep.
There are more teams in the group.
Yep. Okay.
With so many activities going on, how much time is dedicated to your ceremonial meetings, et cetera, versus the actual development time?
Yeah, sure. At last count, and if anybody from the team is in the room and has a disagreement with me, you can take it up with me in the parking lot later. We ask team leads to spend in the 3-week period of time about 9 hours in meetings. The team itself is about 6 hours. Sounds very heavy, but you're talking about 3 weeks of time. And it's actually not that bad. We do very specifically keep meetings in the same place every week. And so if you're expected to go to backlog refinement, it will always be on that one day at the same time. It never gets moved. And it gets canceled if it's not needed. We don't have stand-up if you're going to have backlog refinement. And a lot of the teams do not have meetings for one day in the week. And so generally, Wednesday seems to be the popular day, or Fridays if we have got a lot of folks in the Czech Republic on a team. But they like to have their days where it's just flow time. The other thing I like to tell people that is very important is if you are looking at somebody's calendar and that person's calendar is an engineer, and you see they have one morning meeting, and you're looking for a time to book another meeting with that person, stick it right next to the meeting that they already have. Earlier in my career, I always thought, well, if they got a morning meeting, they probably don't want a back-to-back meeting, so I'll put it in the afternoon. And that is absolutely not what they want you to do. Because what I was effectively doing by sticking that meeting in the afternoon was essentially cutting their day in half and giving them no time to focus. And so they really need like a 4-hour window of time to get into the code and to get really involved in what it is that they're doing. And so we generally try to have all of our meetings in the morning so that people can use the afternoons to kind of work through what it is that they need to work through. Okay, let's move on. And so case number 3. So we had a few more bumps. This is what the team looks like as of today. I just counted this morning because I like to be statistically accurate. We are 21 hybrid Scrum teams. We will still work in 3-week sprints now. We have a 6-week release cycle for Atomic Host, about a 6-month release cycle for OpenShift Container Platform. We don't have as many engineers as I would think after 3 years. We went from about 100 to about 125, give or take 5 people. So we didn't actually scale that much in the engineering side. Where you might have noticed we scaled was on the quality engineering side. And so we went from, I think, in 2014, it was about maybe 20, to 60 QE engineers. And many of them are actually embedded in our sprint teams now. So they work side by side with the engineers on a daily basis. We now have about 20 documentation experts. Those are the people who write product documentation for us. And in case you were thinking that we let engineers get away with not writing product documentation, that's actually not true. The engineers typically will write the first pass, and then the product documentation people will come in and do what I call beautification. They'll actually check all the steps and make sure they actually make sense, work. That's a good part. And then put the whole Red Hat stamp of approval on it. We have 3 release engineers, 3 Agile coaches, 5 group leads now, 8 product managers, and we are surrounded by many, many, many other awesome people from product marketing, from our community people, from program management, you name it. We are a program that is highly supported. This is what the team, sure. Are they just testers? Yeah. They are not just testers. Yes, you should meet them in the parking lot. I might come with them. They are just testers. Yeah. Yeah. So we, unless you are not a Red Hat customer, we generally tell you that our product line is secure and you don't have to worry about bugs, right? Does that sound familiar? Okay, come on, really? No, everybody's too tired and maybe haven't had enough coffee. So we actually do employ a pretty extensive QE, quality engineering organization, to make sure that actually happens. And so while, as a good Agile coach, I tell my engineers, hey, yeah, you got to write documentation for your product, but you also are responsible for the quality of your product. We have that extra layer of quality checking on top of it because we're paranoid. And so we do, in a sprint, the engineers will code their work, and following right back along behind them, a quality engineer will come and they'll basically, I'm not going to say audit, but they'll basically test everything right hand in hand with that engineer. This is another pair of eyes. Yeah, those are the folks on our production support side of the fence who actually take the code from us and then shuttle it up to the portal where you guys then download it. And so they're the folks who maintain our internal tooling like Brew, the stuff that builds everything that we work on. Yeah. Okay. So the team structure today, so we still have groups 0, 1, and 2. And there wasn't a whole lot of change in there. We did introduce 1 or 2 new teams. I'll talk about that in a second. So yes, I did. We introduced the Cube Origin team. And so what we learned was rebasing Cube into Origin was really hard, and we needed to figure a better way to do that. So we pulled some people aside and said, figure out how to do that better. And so that team is focused on figuring out how to rebase faster. We now introduced, we introduced a 4th group. We pulled the integration people out into their own group. The end-to-end application integration and provider integration, again, those are the people who are generally working with our partners to make sure that OpenShift is running sanely in the environments and with the applications that they need to be running with. Still got the scale and performance team there. And then we created kind of this new group 3, which is full of a bunch of things that you might be saying, gee, I wonder what that is. And gee, why doesn't this team release to production every 3 weeks? And so back in version 2 days, we actually did do a production release to OpenShift Online at the end of every sprint. And so all of the things that happened between version 2, surprise, we rewrote the entire code of OpenShift between version 2 and version 3. We introduced 60 new engineers into the overall program. We pushed everybody together and added technology at a rate that was insane. We kind of got a little bit away from this idea that continuous delivery was a thing, and that was probably not such a good idea. And so as we got away from that idea that continuous delivery was not a thing, the valley widened, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger between what we were capable of doing and what our infrastructure could do for us. And so what we did was we carved out a team who's specifically in place now to get us back to where we were a couple of years ago. And so everything would be automated for us again. And it's largely focusing on the idea that we do continuous integration all automatically. No code gets merged without running through our extensive test suite. But we need to take that into the actual building of the product and then running some sanity tests on top of that build so that we can reduce the number of bugs that teams are experiencing, because they're going to get immediate feedback that what they're doing is wrong or breaking. Additionally, we added a customer success team. This team is largely focused on essentially providing that central subject matter expertise when we need, when a customer has a problem and we need to have immediate response to that problem. And so we kind of carved some people out just to be kind of in there, making sure they're there. And then also, once they can see a pattern in the things that are happening, we can actually create diagnostic tools to help us actually troubleshoot that before they even happen. Let's see. That's it. Okay, cool. So where can you start? I've got 5 minutes left, and I got a few more slides, and I'll take questions at the end. Does that sound good? All right, great. So where can I start? So do you think I'm telling you all to start with one team? Anybody want to raise their hand? It's okay. Don't. He's like, no. He's like, don't say it. At the core, what I'm recommending is lean. I'm not recommending Scrum. I'm recommending only do what you need to do when you need to do it, and make sure you understand why you're doing things. And so let's talk about my anti-patterns for scaling. So the first one, never add a team before you really need to, and really think hard before you add that team. Because every single time you add more people into your messy mix, you're going to increase your problems. And if you don't have somebody specifically dedicated to actually helping solve them, like somebody like me, they're going to be even that much messy. Never optimize before it's time. And so what I generally say to this is, I get people come up to me all the time and say, I read this article that tells us we should be doing this. How come we don't do this with our teams? Or I read this article and it says that what we're doing over here is not the right thing to be doing. We should be doing the right thing as described by Martin Fowler or something like that. And I always say to them, well, what is it that you're trying to fix? And then I get that blank look. I'm just trying to be right. That's not a good enough reason. You got to know what you want to fix before you fix it. And so if you're going to change something, you better be sure that you have a real good answer when that engineer or when that product manager or when the VP of engineer says, how come you disrupted my teams and they're slower now because you changed this thing? So have a really good reason for that. And then my third one is never stop inspecting and adapting your process. Because the second you stop means that your process is going to be outdated and you're never going to keep up with other people in the industry. And most importantly, your process is not just about moving cards on a Kanban board. It's about the infrastructure, it's about the technology, it's about the things that everybody in the system needs to do to get their work done. It's not just what a program manager needs to actually make sure that a product release is going to go out on time. It's what your quality engineers need in order to make sure they're doing their jobs. It's what the documentation people need in order to make sure they're pulling their part of the product. Everybody has an equal role to play, and everybody should be part of this process. And then also, learn to recognize very, very early when something is a bad idea. So thank you so very much. My last plea is please rate this talk in the lovely app that you have downloaded. I would love your feedback for future presentations, and I will take questions for the very short minutes that we have left. I think anybody? I am also, okay, great. In the back? Yeah, we put them in a cage, remember? We opened the door and we shoved them all in and said, figure it out. I literally have had that conversation with them. I do not ever want to have a multiple disagreeing vision coming from two separate organizations. And I didn't put them in a cage and tell them to work it out. I just said, guys, this is the problem. I outlined the problem. I said, you're really confusing people. Please have a central vision. And they took it to heart, and they did. And so they work really well together. So I've had some people inside of Red Hat actually pull in parts of less to help them fix their process, and they've discarded all the things that they don't need. And so really, I think the major point is make sure you understand all of the problems that your team is having, why they're really having those problems, and most importantly, prioritize the problems and fix that most painful one first. And so you might pull things out of those frameworks and apply them to your teams, but you may not go heavy-handed with the full framework. All right, I'm out of time. Thank you so very much, and have a good rest of your conference.